Welcome to the desk of the Executive Director of Back Bay Mission. If you've noticed, I've changed out my button. My Black Lives Matter is produced by the United Church of Christ, and I have another button produced by the United Church of Christ, which is also one of my favorite buttons, although it's a bit big and in your face. But it says, "People who use drugs are beloved by God." And I love that because I was thinking today, as I was writing for our summer ask for Back Bay Mission, I was writing about an individual who was addicted to drugs. But anyway, I welcome you to this next. Is this our 12th, 13th?
14th.
Oh my goodness, it's our 14th. Oh, from the desk of the Executive Director. It's amazing. I keep coming up with things to talk about. Hey. So I moved to the coast of Mississippi about 3 months ago. For those of you who've been watching this, I was living in Phoenix and I was serving as the senior pastor of First Church United Church of Christ for the past 7 years in Phoenix. And I want to go back to my arrival in Phoenix. My second week living in Phoenix, Arizona, I was determined to get involved in immigration reform. I had worked with immigrants and immigration, providing HIV and STD prevention services in the past with migrant workers in the great state of Wisconsin, yay cheeseheads. And I worked for the Marathon County Health Department in Wisconsin, the AIDS Resource Center of Wisconsin, and the State of Wisconsin Health Department, and worked always with migrant or immigrant populations. And just before moving to Phoenix, I worked with immigration reform in the state of Minnesota and traveled to Washington, D.C. with a group of migrant undocumented workers to advocate for migrant immigration reform. Now, the main immigration issue in Minnesota and the upper Midwest was not only seasonal migrant farm workers, but also individuals who were working in meat packing plants that were undocumented. And there were often raids in these meat packing plants that would separate well-meaning parents attempting to make a better life for their families and separate these parents from their children. Well, I'll tell you, things are so different when it comes to immigration reform and immigration when you're living in a border state. And that's what I found out right quick when I moved to Phoenix. The border, as we know, along the Mexico border, the U.S. border has been an incredible hot button over the last number of years. Actually, really, since the beginning of our nations, right? And very honestly, the path to citizenship in America, it is long, it's difficult, it's expensive, and in my opinion, the process needs to change. So it's my second week in Phoenix, Arizona. The ICE offices, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, were just 3 blocks north of the church that I was serving, First Church United Church of Christ. And Puente, an organization that worked for immigration reform throughout Arizona, had called for an action because word was out now that children were being separated from their parents at the Mexican-U.S. border. Word was also leaking out that some of the children were being held in detention centers that were cramped, cold, and many of these sick children were coming across the border and were not being cared for in these detention centers. Well, it was at this first action that I had an opportunity to meet an individual who would become a comrade in justice and one of my very closest friends, Rabbi Shmuley Yankovitz. And he is actually considered one of America's top 50 most influential rabbis. The unique thing about Rabbi Shmuley, and you can Google him if you'd like, he didn't have a temple, but he served as the director of a Jewish organization for justice called Valley Beit Midrash, which is a forward-thinking, pluralistic, not-for-profit organization rooted in Jewish ethics and committed to justice. Now, Brother Rabbi Shmuley identified as a modern Orthodox, and we used to always go on the road together, attempting to usually find a Muslim individual, an imam who was progressive and who would work with us to kind of make a statement, right? That we have a Jewish, we have a Christian, we have a Muslim individual here, and we're all about the same work for equity and justice. Well, I had previously read Rabbi Shmuley's book, The Jewish Vegan, and then also The Soul of the Jewish social justice, I found myself on a journey. And that journey has lasted now about 8 years. And I've been rediscovering a different kind of Jesus than the Jesus that I was taught in traditional Christianity. It's a Jesus that is a brown-skinned Palestinian Jew who is influenced by his Middle Eastern culture and Jewish faith. I also discovered, as I deepened my work around interfaith, that the more deeply I studied the Jewish and the Muslim faiths, I would find similarities rather than differences. I would find intersections rather than distractions. And I found that these three Abrahamic traditions that came from Abraham and Sarah, who consider Abraham and Sarah the founders of the Christian, of the Jewish, of the Muslim faith, that we had much more in common than we had differences. And it was my understanding of this concept of loving kindness. All three faiths, Christians, Jews, and Muslims, focus on loving kindness and justice. Now, it's strange because, as we know, all three of these world religions have also perverted this idea of loving kindness. And they've perverted these religions so that it divides us rather than brings us together. And literally, wars have been fought, religious wars between Jews and Muslims, Palestinians and Christians, right? You've probably heard of Rabbi Harold Kushner. He's one of my favorite authors. He's a speaker too, and he said, when you are kind to others, it not only changes you, but it changes the world. Hear that again. When you are kind to others, it not only changes you, but it changes the world. You know, I thought maybe after this last election we would stop being so polarized, but then we got into the middle of BLM and we got into the middle of the pandemic and the mask wearing or not mask wearing. Is it a legit pandemic? Isn't it a legit pandemic? And somehow we've also lost, I think, some of our ability to be kind to others. I will admit, moving back to Mississippi and living here as an adult on the coast, I'll tell you, people are kinder here. People say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, no, ma'am, no, sir. People hold doors open for you. Even when I go to Planet Fitness where I work out, people hold the door open as I enter, as I exit. I find myself doing the same. And even in my small community of Ocean Springs across the bridge from Biloxi where I live, people wave at you as they're going by in their golf carts. People say hello to you in the grocery store at Walmart. And it seems that strangers ask how your day is going around Mississippi here, and they really want to know how your day is going, and they'll tell you how theirs is going too. For that, I'm incredibly grateful that there's a sense of kindness here that I haven't experienced in other places. And what I'm learning here at Back Bay Mission, as I've throughout all of my social work experience and honestly my church experience, has been that kindness, loving kindness, is key for our staff and for our guests. Jesus said, this brown-skinned Palestinian Jew, influenced by Middle Eastern Jewish culture because he himself was a Jew, he said, you know, the most important thing in the world, folks, is this: to love God, however you understand God. Jesus really didn't define God for us, if you notice. And then he said, love yourself, and then love the other, love your neighbor. And then people said, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus literally said, the world is full of neighbors. And then Jesus talks, when he says love, he's talking about loving kindness. Loving kindness, which equals compassion. Kindness, compassion, love. I found as a pastor, as a social worker, as an executive director, and there's so many roles that I've held throughout my life, either working with people who are HIV positive, working with homeless, runaway, throwaway youth, working with people experiencing homelessness or living in poverty, or working with people sitting in pews. You know, we only know one part of the individual story. We know about this much of somebody's story that is this big, right? Bob, one of our long-term volunteers here at Back Bay Mission, shared this with me yesterday evening as we were having a parking lot conversation. And I love this diagram. It says, why you should be gentle and kind with people, because you know this much about their life, and their life is this big. I don't know your story. You really don't know my story except from what I share or what I'm willing to share. We don't know the stories of the guests in the Micah Day Center who are experiencing homelessness or poverty. They have deep, deep stories with many challenges that have put them on the streets and will never be able to walk in their shoes as hard as we may try to understand another's experience. I will never know what it's like to be a woman. I will never know what it's like to walk in black or brown skin. I will never know what it's like to live in poverty, except I did as a child. I do know what it's like to be homeless, as I was homeless as a youth. But nobody knows my experience completely, and I will never know your experience completely. I also think about the volunteers who come down here to work on people's homes and do repairs and work on low-income housing. We don't know their whole story, and we don't know the whole story that brings them here. But what they do is powerful, right? And what they do is life-changing. So I encourage you today to live with a greater sense of loving kindness, with a greater sense of compassion. As the rabbi says, when you are kind to others, it not only changes you, me, but it changes the world. So be gentle, be kind, be loving. And remember, you don't know somebody's whole story, you only know this much. But if we live out loving kindness, we may just change our world for the better. So today I encourage you to respond to this. If it's touched you, if it's taught you, if it's angered you, whatever your response is, send in a response, share these stories, share these videos, and then listen Wednesday as some of our staff talk about their experiences here at Back Bay Mission. So we're grateful for your time and for your energy that you put into watching these, and feel free to contact us and support us in whatever way works for you. So thank you again for joining us.